I always start with the question of what is family business. I at least have seen maybe 100 definitions of what is a family business. So in reality, academically, there is no real definition of what is a family business. Reason why is it has to do a lot with law. So depending on how law is structured, how social norms are structured, from a taxing point of view, how companies or financials are structured, definitions differ. Currently, you'd see a lot of those family offices having maybe the second generation or even the third generation getting involved. So at least within the UAE, I would claim the same with most of GCC countries. Wealth is relatively sudden, only came in the last few decades. Hence, a lot of challenges and sustainability issues are relatively new. Unlike many other Western economies or more mature economies or economies that had hundreds of years of the existence of establishments, the GCC and the UAE are relatively new. So as I mentioned, a business within the context of UAE or an Emirati family business is a business in which 51% of shares are owned by one single UAE family, and at least one member of the management team is drawn from the family that owns the business. Family businesses assume a substantial role in the economies of most countries globally, and UAE is not an exception. So the usual challenges that people speak of when addressing a family office are subjects to do with governance, financial and legal structuring, succession planning, values and beliefs, social status, willingness to take risk, and family relationships. So as I mentioned, because of the youngness of family offices within, or Emirati family offices, a lot of issues are actually popping up as we speak. First generation is passing away, second generation or third generation are involved in the business. There is a lot of carriage there, a lot of challenges when it comes to social structures, geopolitical issues. I did a survey on a small sample. I don't think it's a representative sample, but it just gives you a hint. When I asked them, what do you think of structuring your wealth? So I asked around 10 families, what do you think of structuring your wealth before the passing of the founder? So almost half of the sample said you are getting into the business of God. These are matters to do with God. Why are you interfering? This is the average lifespan of family firms in the region. 23 years. It's a shocking number. There are some recent developments, new rules, regulations. So, for example, Dubai World Trade Center Authority, they've introduced structures for holding companies, whereby they claim you can transfer assets regardless of their regardless of the jurisdiction they fall within the country without additional costs. They've created those structures whereby you can create what is referred to as cell companies, meaning you have a holding company and there are cell companies that are owned by the holding company, which gives it less sophisticated legal structuring and probably less cost. Abu Dhabi just very recently issued a regulation when it comes to family offices, a lot to do with who can own into them, selling businesses, restricting ownership, asset classes, different voting capabilities, and so on and so forth. So some to do with also dispute resolution. So they created those specialized centers for dispute resolutions. So there is no one way of doing things in family governance.
Mm.
But a lot of it starts with aspects to do with like a family charter, basically establishing an understanding amongst family members on how things should be designed or administered within a family. So family charter establishes understanding, and understanding is a lot to do with who runs businesses, who can get involved, what are the things that the family are comfortable with when it comes to businesses, practices, policies to do with board selection of companies, involvement of third-party experts into boards, lines of businesses, employment of family members, buy and sell of shares, so on and so forth. So these are matters that usually would be covered in something called the family charter. Family conflict resolutions, there are many models. A lot of that would usually fall within the family charter. So in case of conflict, what's the route to resolve conflict? There are expert determinations, there's mediation, and more and more you'll find arbitration centers that are designing themselves to do this. And I do know within the different states within the UAE, there are more family businesses arbitration centers coming up, sponsored by governments. This is where I see a lot of families not being so creative about and mature on. They still hang on their old ways of investing because they were successful. So a lot of families still do a lot of real estate or try to find agencies, and they don't tend to understand global financial best or money management best practices. So within my studies, I attempted to evolve a business model, basically a sustainable family business model. There are a few of them in academia. The only aspect that I've added was a deep look into context. So whoever is in business and probably in social sciences would have heard of business systems theory, which looks at context. Why do companies evolve differently within economies?
So I just have diversification from the intro that Dr. Bezalina had about you, and you mentioning the schools. Is it something that you like a preference to you, like to diversify?
So I was in healthcare and financial services, consumerism, technology, FMB, FMCG. And I wanted to always get into education, and I strived for 8 years to develop this one project. So I'm bullish about education, and my thesis there is I hope to envision the future of the students 10 to 15 years from now. Now, I have this habit of investing small tickets into a lot of small companies, up and coming future companies that most people haven't heard of yet. So I'm lucky in getting exposed to a lot of concepts that most people haven't yet heard of. And those concepts will be the future of our kids. And I hope that the education system delivers on these concepts for our kids. And hence I developed this education institution, the capacity of which is around 2,700 students. whereby most future concepts will be exposed to kids earlier on in their education process.